And in our campaign, we have found, for instance, specifically in Limpopo, that there is quite an increase of the support, specifically from black supporters there.
Now we know that the Freedom Front Party, led by Dr. Pieter Groenewald, wants to eradicate all black economic empowerment programs sponsored by the ANC. Yet he argues that most of his followers, especially in a province like Limpopo, are black. How do we explain this phenomenon? Let's listen to what he has to say about some of his policies, and I'll be back for some really interesting analysis.
Moving on to the Freedom Front Plus, represented by their leader, Dr. Pieter Groenewald, this evening. Well, the Freedom Front Plus, they saw their seats increase in the National Assembly from 4 in 2014 to 10 in 2019. And we wonder, Blaine, can they continue to replicate that good fortune?
Yeah, the party is obviously banking on their ideals as a party that is committed to group rights, they're against affirmative action, and towards, as they say, a better South Africa for all. The question is, does this message resonate to a broad audience? The leader is here with us tonight, Dr. Pieter Groenewald. As you can see, they garnered over 414,000 votes in 2019. That's about 2.4%. But look at here, this is where it increases. 4 seats in 2014, and that jumped to 10 seats. So that trajectory is on an upward. But 2024, that's where the question mark remains. Dr. Groenewald, we spoke about the numbers and the positive trajectory that the Freedom Front Plus is in from 2014 to 2019. 4 seats 2014, 10 seats 2019. But the question remains, is your message broad enough to increase your base?
Let me say so, yes, we do believe we're going to increase it. If you look at our manifesto launch, you would see that for the first time, we had quite a lot of people attending of all races, not only white people, from all races. And in our campaign, we have found, for instance, specifically in Limpopo, that there is quite an increase of the support, specifically from black supporters there. So, yes, we can broaden, and we do believe that we are going to broaden our support base. And you must always remember that there is no single political party who on its own will be able to have a 50% plus one. And that's where the Freedom Front Plus will play a crucial role to be part of those political parties to add on in a coalition. So we are optimistic that it will go well.
Yeah, so what do you guys think? I think for this analysis, this is going to be one of my most interesting videos because it's going to be like the first time I'm going to be studying the Freedom Front Plus and its manifesto for South Africa, especially being the fact that some of you have written here that I'm so in love with the DA and that the other parties to analyze. The Freedom Front Party here will be the first party, like the next party that I believe mostly seen as a white-dominated party, but we're going to be going in-depth into what the Freedom Front Party stands for and its future for South Africa. So let's begin. So this is going to be like FFP, Freedom Front Party for Dummies 101, okay? Yeah. So according to research available, it says that the Freedom Front Party is a right-wing political party in South Africa that was formed as the Freedom Front in 1994 and is now today led by Pieter Groenewald, okay? And the Freedom Front was launched on March the 1st, 1994 by members of the Afrikaner community under Constant Viljoen, after he had left the Afrikaner Volksfront amidst disagreements. Seeking to achieve his goals through electoral means, Viljoen registered the Freedom Front with the Independent Electoral Commission on 4th of March 1994 to take part in the April 1994 general elections. The date has also been given as probably 7th of March 1994 as well. But on March the 12th, 1994, Viljoen handed in a list of candidates for the Freedom Front to the IEC, confirming that his party would take part in the elections. Now, in the election under the leadership of Wildwen, the Freedom Front received 2.2% of the national vote at the time in 1994, which was 424,555 votes that were cast. I mean, yes. So it earned 9 seats in the National Assembly and 3.3%, which was 639,643 votes of the combined votes to the 9 provincial legislatures. So this suggested that many Afrikaners had split their vote and that the party performed best in the rural areas of the former Transvaal and Orange Free State and was noted by the new Deputy President Thabo Mbeki as representing possibly as much as half of the Afrikaner voting population in these areas, especially with the strong support among farmers and working class. So this is really interesting because I remember in one of the critiques Musi Maimane gave us his reason why he left the DA. He actually argued, I think, that, the DA was usually seen as a breakaway from the Freedom Front Plus, which was clearly an Afrikaner white-dominated party. And so the DA wanted to sort of like represented the breakout that actually allowed some of the mixed races, more like a multiracial, non-racialist approach to its composition at the time. But then he later started realizing that there was still a minority within the DA that actually wanted this more white minority perspective to South Africa's development. So this really puts it into perspective that the Freedom Front Party, in a way, actually felt like at its inception more like dominated by an Afrikaner minority, okay, especially those of the farmers and then the working class among the Afrikaners. So the research also argues here that Freedom Front support gradually melted away in the coming years as the party was strung along in ultimately fruitless negotiations with the ANC to create a Volksstaat, making the party lose its importance. It would also receive increased competition from new members, such as the Afrikaner Eenheidsbeweging, right? I don't know if I got that correctly. So it's an Afrikaner Eenheidsbeweging, right? But let's check quickly what this Volksstaat means, because that's really interesting. So it says a Volksstaat is a people's state, right? It's called a Boer state. It's a proposed white homeland for Afrikaners within the borders of South Africa, most commonly proposed as a fully independent Boer Afrikaner nation, right? So that's a Volksstaat. So in other words, in English, we might also say it as a Volk state, so to speak. So it says here that one of the reasons why this Freedom Front Plus party slowly melted away in the coming years after 1994 was because of its fruitless negotiations with the ANC at the time to create a state that would be dominated by an Afrikaner nationalism, so to speak. And so it lost its popularity during those years, the early years and from 94 thereabout. And also here, the research says that by 1999 election, the support of the Freedom Front Party dropped to 0.8%, which was 127,217 votes that were cast, with 3 seats in the National Assembly and between 1 to 2% in their stronghold provinces. So this gives us a perspective as to why their support in a province like Limpopo suddenly seems to be dominated by blacks, because it's really important to understand why, such a phenomenon would be occurring. Now, it says that this 0.8% in the 1999 election was represented by a respectable portion of the Afrikaner vote, but nowhere near earlier levels. So the Afrikaner support of the Freedom Front Plus at this time in 1999 seemed to also have been reducing for reasons I'm not able to understand. But the party's support remained relatively stable in all national elections held during the next 20 years. Okay, so now let's quickly go to the, according to research, the policies and the ideology of the Freedom Front Plus before I get into its manifesto. So we understand the future of, the direction the Freedom Front Plus sees for South Africa and its future. So it says that the Freedom Front Plus is a right-wing conservative political party with its beliefs and ideals largely centered around Afrikaner interests and Afrikaner nationalism with an orientation around Christian values. Okay, so this is its positionality, both ideologically and political wise. And also it says with its origin in Afrikaner Volksfront, which means the Afrikaner People's Front and the Conservative Party, the Freedom Front Plus's position has shifted from being more moderate and populist since its beginning, particularly under the leadership of Pieter Groenewald, whom has campaigned to alleviate issues within both Afrikaner and colored communities, particularly with the Cape provinces, so the Northern Cape, the Western Cape, and the Eastern Cape. So this might explain why the Freedom Front Plus party seems to be gathering more black votes, because Pieter Groenewald here actually seems to have been advocating for more of an alleviation of the issues within also the colored communities, okay? So it hasn't just focused on an Afrikaner nationalism in that regard, but Pieter Groenewald has been spreading tentacles into other communities, trying to also embrace this non-racialist perspective to development in South Africa. And so this is one way to explain why there's a rise in black votes in provinces like Limpopo and maybe in the nation in general. So let's quickly go to its Let's quickly go to the Freedom Front Plus manifesto, because they have some really interesting, agenda in their manifesto on how to save and rescue South Africa, from 2024 onwards, especially from these elections. So we'll begin by its plan to restore the economy and build wealth in South Africa, okay? So Pieter Groenewald's party, the Freedom Front Party, says that South Africa currently finds itself in an unprecedented economic crisis due to the ANC government's mismanagement and abuses. And as a result of limited job opportunities and inadequate economic growth, there's a small tax base and yet a great social need and expenditure. So like Helen Zille usually speaks about, that South Africa's large population is being carried by a small number of taxpayers, okay? Same here with the argument with the Freedom Front Plus. It also argues that this problem has been coupled with the government's exorbitant wage bill, which leads to excessive government debt compounded by interest on that debt, which is ultimately pushing the country closer and closer to a fiscal edge in ruin. So some of the aspects in which the Freedom Front Plus wants to address the economy include abolishment of black economic empowerment and affirmative action policies, while shifting focus to skills development and quality education. So it wants to carry out the Employment Equity Act, which should be scrapped. It argues that the Employment Equity Act should be scrapped. The Freedom Front Plus advocates that corruption should be eradicated at all levels of government through the political will to prosecute offenders and put a stop to corrupt practices. It also wants to do away with the needless regulations that make it difficult to start up and operate business enterprises. Regulatory clarity and deregulation is also needed. It also argues that policy certainty is needed to encourage investment in South Africa. So the concept of expropriating property at no or nil compensation should be abolished. So here it goes head to head with the EFF. It's clear in its manifesto that it's not really for this whole expropriation without compensation, okay? So it says that it should be abolished, and at once the new expropriation bill that seeks to make it possible should be scrapped. Now, in arguing for labor legislation, the Freedom Front Plus argues that labor legislation and regulation should be amended to encourage and facilitate job creation. Visa regulations also should be relaxed, and a system of e-visas should be implemented to make traveling to South Africa easier. The Freedom Front Plus also speaks about implementing other structural reforms that would entail removing all barriers to the fourth industrial revolution by unlocking broadband internet access, among other things, and as well as implementing legislative reforms relating to cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. The Freedom Front Plus wants to privatize state-owned enterprises and stop all financial lifelines to failed entities. The South African I believe airways should also be completely privatized, and tax money should no longer be squandered on the airline. Right? So the Freedom Front Plus wants to privatize South African Airways, right? Now, Freedom Front Plus also argues that quality education and skills development are needed to sustainably eradicate unemployment. So it also speaks about the special economic zones, which should be expanded and consolidated. Yeah. So it argues that government expenditure should be curtailed in the following ways. So the Freedom Front Plus wants to curtail government expenditure in the following ways. One, it wants to privatize all state-owned enterprises through a mix of partial sale and full sale. It also wants to make all public service appointments solely based on merit, and also revise the salary scales of senior management positions. It also wants to limit public officials' performance bonuses, and also limit salary increases to no higher than the inflation rate. And also, in eradicating corruption, it wants to also reduce the size of the public service and reduce the number of ministries in South Africa. So this is, I think I'll take other policies bit by bit from the Freedom Front Plus, but this is how the Freedom Front Plus wants to save South Africa's economy. It's more on the side of a liberal economic trajectory. It wants to privatization. It's more into investment, opening, taking away the whole expropriation bill and taking out all these EFFs, especially EFF stands on expropriation without compensation. And then I'm sure it's more supportive of the farmers, yes, and the trajectory in which South Africa has been in terms of investment and entrepreneurship and all that. The Freedom Front Plan stands for that trajectory, and it's that trajectory for South Africa. And so I believe this is kind of like a way to begin the analysis on Pieter Groenewald's Freedom Front Party manifesto. And I just wanted to ask, what do you guys think about this perspective? What do you guys think about the Freedom Front Party and its direction, especially the fact that it's gathering more black votes in South Africa at the moment? Share your thoughts in the comments.